To reconcile terror and survival, they carved a god. They took the monster's terrifying head and placed it on the body of an all-powerful being. They called him Sobek. He was the god of fertility, the bringer of fertile floodwaters, the symbol of the Pharaoh's own brutal power. He was their savior, but he also bore the face of their greatest enemy. How, then, could humans bow before the image of their ultimate fear? And was Sobek caught between being a benefactor and a monster, ultimately a god or a prisoner of that very worship? So, this is the central mystery of Sobek. This is the paradox. How can a single being be both the focus of our deepest terror and our most desperate hope? To answer that, we can't just look at the god himself. We must first understand the world that created him. We have to understand the mind of the people who lived on that riverbank, a people whose entire existence was balanced on a razor's edge between a life-giving paradise and a scorching, empty void. The key to unlocking the mystery of Sobek lies in the world that created him. And that world, ancient Egypt, was not one country. It was two. But they weren't Upper and Lower Egypt. They were the Black Land and the Red Land. This distinction was not political. It was existential. It was the absolute defining reality of life and death. First, there was Kemet, the Black Land. This was the name the Egyptians themselves used for their country. It didn't refer to the people. It referred to the soil. It was the narrow, vibrant, life-filled ribbon of dark, fertile silt that flanked the Nile River. In some places, this ribbon was miles wide. In others, you could stand in the center of it and throw a stone into the desert on either side. This was Egypt. This was life. Everything, food, water, transport, faith, culture, came from this miraculous black mud. It was the soil that produced the endless bounty of emmer wheat and barley, the flax for their linen robes, the papyrus for their texts, the vegetables for their tables. It was the mud that fed the reeds where the birds nested and the fish spawned. The entire civilization, from the grandest pyramid to the humblest mud brick hut, was built on, and from this black land. Then there was Deshret, the Red Land. This was the vast, howling, lifeless desert that stretched out in every direction, just beyond the black soil. It was the color of rust and dried blood. It was the realm of chaos, of demons, of oblivion. The Red Land was a physical, scorching wall that separated Egypt from the rest of the world. It was a place where the sun was not a life-giver, but a killer. It was the place of blinding storms, of venomous snakes and scorpions, and of a terrifying, profound silence. The ancient Egyptians lived their entire lives on this razor's edge. Their whole world was a few hundred meters of fertile mud, separating their entire civilization from an endless, scorching void. The psychological impact of this geography is impossible to overstate. For an ancient Egyptian, to be exiled into the Red Land was not just a punishment, it was a sentence to be unmade. It was to be erased from existence. Their entire cosmic worldview was based on this duality: Mi'at, divine order, truth, and justice, which was embodied by the predictable, fertile black land, and Isfet, chaos, violence, and lies, which was embodied by the sterile, unpredictable red land. And the difference between the two, the difference between life and death, order and chaos, a single annual miracle. Every Egyptian farmer, every priest, every pharaoh lived their life by a clock of 3 seasons, not spring, summer, autumn, and winter, but Akhet, Peret, and Shemu. Akhet was the season of the inundation. Around our modern June, the river would begin to swell. This wasn't a local flood. This was a continental event. Far to the south, the massive summer monsoons in the Ethiopian highlands were washing tons of volcanic silt from the headwaters of the Blue Nile and the Atbara River. This torrent of water and sediment would surge north, arriving in Egypt in a great, muddy, life-giving wave. The Nile would burst its banks and the black land would disappear. For 3 months, Egypt would become a vast, shallow lake dotted with island villages and the high ground causeways of the temples. Farmers would not farm. They would fish, mend their tools, or be conscripted for the Pharaohs' building projects, hauling stone for pyramids and tombs. It was a time of stillness, of waiting. Then around September, the waters would recede. This was the season of Pare, the emergence. The river shrank back, leaving behind a fresh, glistening, perfectly fertilized layer of that miraculous black silt. The land was reborn. Farmers waded into the thick, rich mud, casting their seeds, and the crops would spring up with an impossible speed, often requiring little to no irrigation. Finally came Shemu, the dry or harvest season. The sun beat down, the land grew hard, and the farmers reaped the extraordinary bounty that the river had gifted them. Grain was cut, threshed, and stored in massive granaries. This was the wealth of Egypt. This was the wealth that built the pyramids and fed the armies. Then the cycle would begin again. The river would shrink, the land would crack, and a deep national anxiety would set in. Would the flood come again? Would the gods be kind? Because this miracle was balanced on a knife's edge. It was a gift from a tyrant. The Egyptians knew from bitter ancestral memory that the God River was fickle. If the monsoons in Ethiopia were weak, the flood would be too low, the Akhet would be feeble, not all the land would be covered, the silt would be thin, the granaries would not be filled. 1 low Nile meant hardship, 2 low Niles meant hunger, 3 low Niles meant a skeletal nation-ending famine. The state would collapse, chaos would rule, and the Red Land would, in essence, win. But just as terrifying, the flood could be too high. A massive, uncontrolled flood was a raging, destructive monster. It would not just cover the land, it would annihilate it. It would smash the mud brick villages, wash away the dikes and canals that had taken years to build, and drown the very people and livestock it was meant to feed. This was the central, terrifying paradox of Egyptian life. The river was their loving father, but he was also an unpredictable, violent tyrant. The water that fed them could, on a whim, starve them or drown them. Now imagine you are a person living in this world. You are a brilliant, sophisticated human being. You are a proto-scientist. You observe the world. You see the patterns, but you cannot see the monsoons in Ethiopia. You have no way of knowing what the river will do. You need to make sense of this. You need a way to interface with this awesome arbitrary power. You need to believe, you must believe, that it is not random, that it is controlled, that it is the will of a being you can speak to, a being you can appease, a being you can perhaps influence. You look to the river itself, you look for the ultimate expression of its power, and you see him. He is a creature that spends its days lounging on the banks, looking as inert as a half-sunken log. A creature that can lie so still for so long that birds will land on its back. It seems lazy, primitive, almost dead. And then, in the blink of an eye, it explodes. The Nile crocodile is a biological masterpiece, honed by millions of years to be the perfect riverine predator. Its power is not just in its famous jaws, which can snap shut with over 3,700 pounds per square inch of force. Its power is in its patience. It is a ghost in the water. It can move with barely a ripple. Its eyes, ears, and nostrils are all perched on the very top of its head, allowing it to see, hear, and breathe while being almost completely submerged. It can wait, motionless, for hours for a gazelle, a cow, or a human child to come to the water's edge. It doesn't hunt with aggression, it hunts with gravity. Its strike is one of the fastest in the animal kingdom. It doesn't come out to chase. It waits for the world to come to it. And when it strikes, it does not kill with its teeth. It seizes its prey, and its one relentless, overwhelming instinct is to pull it down into the water, into its element. It kills with the river itself, using its weight and the water to drown its victim. It is the seizer, the one who takes. And this same terrifying creature has another side. The Egyptians, meticulous observers of nature, saw this too. They saw the female crocodile defend her nest with a ferocity that was almost unparalleled. They saw her gently, with those same bone-crushing jaws, crack open her own eggs to help her hatchlings emerge. They saw her carry her tiny, vulnerable young in her mouth, protecting them from predators and releasing them into the safety of the water. This was it. This was the one. This was the God. This animal was the perfect, living, breathing embodiment of the Nile's paradox. He is the violent, sudden, arbitrary devourer. He is the fierce, potent, life-giving protector. He is the God who lunges from the water to take a life, and he is the God who tenderly carries new life in his jaws. He is the master of the in-between, the creature who belongs to both the land and the water. He emerges from the rich black mud of the riverbank, the very source of fertility. He is, in his essence, a creature of creation and destruction, fused into one scaly, terrifying, and awe-inspiring form. He wasn't an allegory. He wasn't a symbol. To the ancient Egyptians, he was the river's power. His primal saurian nature, his sudden violence, his protective instinct, his association with mud and water and fertility was the perfect explanation for the world they lived in. This is why Sobek is one of the oldest gods in the entire Egyptian pantheon. His worship isn't a late, sophisticated invention by priests in a grand temple. It is primal. It is visceral. It stretches back to the very beginning, to the pre-dynastic tribes, to the first people who settled on those fertile banks and realized their lives were in the hands of a force that could be both a protector and a devourer. They had to appease that force. They had to worship the crocodile. They had to give him a name. But Sobek was not just a label for a concept or a name for an animal they feared. To the ancient mind, to give something a name was to give it a personality, a will, and a story. The god was not an it. He was a him. And his story, his divine biography, is not a simple linear tale. It's a 4,000-year journey of a God evolving alongside the nation that worshipped him, a journey that begins, quite literally, at the beginning of time. Before there was Egypt, before there were pharaohs, before there were pyramids, there was the none. To the ancient Egyptians, the beginning of everything was not a word or a void. It was an ocean. An endless, dark, chaotic, and watery abyss. This was the none. It was the cosmic soup of all potential, the primordial ooze from which all life would eventually, painstakingly, emerge. In the more famous creation myths, the ones from the great cities of Heliopolis and Memphis, a creator god like Adam or Ptah wills himself into existence on the Benben, the first primordial mound of earth to rise from this water. But in other, far older and earthier traditions, the first thing to stir in that primordial darkness was not a man or a bird or a thought. The first sign of life, the first movement in the infinite silent water, was him. In some of these ancient local myths, Sobek is the firstborn. He is the active, creative principle of the none itself. He is the one who emerges from the black waters. And the great Nile River, the artery of the entire world, is said to be the sweat pouring from his body. Think of the power of that image. The lifeblood of their entire civilization is not a gift from a distant sun god. It is the physical, visceral, bodily fluid of a colossal divine reptile. It is earthy. It is potent. It is almost shockingly biological. In another related tradition, it is Sobek, who in the form of a great crocodile swims through the chaos and finds the first mound of earth. He climbs onto it, and with his body he defines the land, separating it from the water. He then lays the cosmic eggs on this bank, and from these eggs hatches the sun, the moon, and all of creation. This makes Sobek, in these traditions, an elder god. He is not just a god. He is the raw, untamed creative force of creation itself. He is what happens when the chaos of the nun first begins to take form. He is the original creator, the father of the gods. This isn't just a poetic idea. We have the receipts. The worship of Sobek is so old that it predates writing, but the moment the Egyptians could write, the moment their civilization began, we see him. The very first pharaohs, the kings who unified the two lands around 3100 BC, already knew him. On clay seals from the reign of Narmer, the legendary unifier of Egypt, archaeologists have found the earliest representations of his cult, the distinct image of crocodiles facing a shrine. This is a staggering fact. Before the first pyramid was even conceived, before the great sagas of Osiris and Isis were codified, at the literal dawn of Egyptian kingship, they were already worshiping the crocodile. His cult is as old as Egypt itself. But to truly hear his voice, we must go to the first great body of religious text in human history, the pyramid texts. Around 2400 BC, during the Old Kingdom, the pharaohs began to carve the inside of their tombs with a vast collection of magic spells, hymns, and prayers. These texts were not a Bible. They were a practical, high-stakes instruction manual. They were a set of supernatural tools designed to do one thing: to ensure the dead king could blast his way through the dangers of the underworld, defeat his enemies, and take his rightful place among the gods as an immortal star. And in this terrifying journey, when the pharaoh Unas needed to claim his power, when he needed to become an invincible, terrifying force, who did he invoke? Carved into the stone of his tomb, in spell 317, we read, "Unas is Sobek, green of plume, watchful of face, raised of brow. He has come, he has appeared as Sobek. Unas has taken his form." This is one of the most revealing passages in all of Egyptian religion. The pharaoh does not pray to Sobek for protection. He does not ask the crocodile god to be his bodyguard. He becomes him. He claims his power by identifying with him. He takes on the aspect of the apex predator. He wants that green-plumed ferocity, that reptilian stillness, that watchful face, that raised of brow, which is the perfect description of a crocodile, eternally vigilant, with his eyes just above the water. In these texts, Sobek is a god of raw, physical, and virile power. He is called upon to restore the king's body, to make him potent and strong again. He is a god who protects, yes, but he does so by being the most terrifying thing in the room. He is the original force that the pharaoh channels to become a god. For 1,000 years, this was his role. He was the ancient, primal, ferocious god of the water. He was respected everywhere, but he was loved in one place in particular, a place that was, to the Egyptian mind, his personal divine paradise on earth. To understand Sobek's rise to national fame, we have to take a journey to his heartland, a place southwest of modern Cairo, a place that was and is unlike any other in Egypt. This is the Faiyum. The Faiyum is not a typical oasis fed by a spring. It is a massive geological depression, a vast bowl-shaped basin the size of a small country, hollowed out by the wind in prehistoric times. It sits below sea level, and it is fed by a long, winding natural channel that branches off the Nile, called the Bahr Yusuf, or Joseph's Canal. In the Old and Middle Kingdoms, this canal did not just irrigate a small area. It dumped a massive volume of the Nile's annual flood into this basin, creating a huge, marshy, freshwater lake. The Greeks would later call it Lake Moeris. This was not a gentle, placid lake. It was a sprawling, primeval wetland, a teeming, reed-choked, labyrinthine swamp. It was an explosion of life. The air was thick with the sound of birds. The waters were so dense with fish, particularly the Nile perch, a creature that can grow to the size of a man, that they were a primary food source for the kingdom. And it was, of course, the perfect habitat for crocodiles. The Faiyum was quite literally crawling with them. They were everywhere. They were the undisputed lords of this swamp paradise. They grew colossal on the abundance of fish. This was, in the Egyptian mind, Sobek's home. This was his throne room, his personal domain, and the capital of this region, the main city on the edge of the lake, was a city called Shedet. For most of Egyptian history, Sobek was known by the title Sobek, Lord of Shedet. This city was so completely identified with its god that when the Greeks, thousands of years later, came to Egypt, they couldn't think of a better name for it. They called it, with a magnificent lack of subtlety, Crocodilopolis, the city of the crocodile. Imagine living there. Imagine your entire economy, your entire life is based on that lake. You are a fisherman in a tiny papyrus skiff. You are a fowler hunting in the reeds. And the god of your city is not an abstract man with a falcon head who lives in the sky. The god of your city is a 15-foot, 1,000-pound reptile who is at this very moment watching you from 10 feet away. The worship here was not abstract. It was immediate. It was necessary, and it was visceral. He was the god of their prosperity, the fish, the birds, and he was the god of their daily mortal terror. For centuries, Sobek was the great god of the Faiyum, powerful, ancient, respected, but still in the grand scheme of things, a local god. The gods of the state, the national gods, were Ra in Heliopolis or Ptah in Memphis. Sobek was the lord of the swamp. And then around 2000 BC, everything changed. Egypt entered one of its most stable, powerful, and brilliant periods, the Middle Kingdom. And the new dynasty of pharaohs, the 12th dynasty, were not just warriors and tomb builders. They were engineers. They were pragmatists. They were ambitious. And they turned their gaze to the Faiyum. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty, men like Amenemhat I and Senusret I, looked at the Faiyum and saw something no one else had. They didn't just see a dangerous swamp teeming with crocodiles. They saw potential. They saw thousands upon thousands of acres, a prime virgin land, drowned under a shallow, manageable lake. They saw a breadbasket. They conceived one of the most ambitious engineering projects in the history of the ancient world. Not as vast as the Great Pyramid, perhaps, but infinitely more complex and arguably more beneficial to the nation. They decided they were going to tame the Faiyum. This wasn't just a dream. They did it. Pharaoh after pharaoh poured state resources into the Faiyum reclamation project. They built a massive system of dikes, canals, and sluice gates to control the flow of water from the Bahr Yusuf. They didn't drain the lake entirely, but they contained it, managing its level, and in doing so, they reclaimed a vast territory of new, incredibly fertile farmland. The Faiyum became the pharaoh's personal project. It became the new agricultural heartland of Egypt, but this created a profound political and theological problem. How do you, as pharaoh, justify this? You are, in essence, marching into the sacred, personal, divine paradise of an ancient, ferocious, and notoriously short-tempered god, and you are draining it. This is an act of almost unimaginable hubris. This is the kind of thing that gets you devoured, and your entire nation cursed with famine. You cannot do this as an enemy of the god. You cannot do it as a conqueror of his land. The Pharaohs of the 12th dynasty had a solution of pure political genius. They would not conquer the Faiyum. They would become its patrons. They would do this massive, intrusive project for Sobek. They would frame it as an act of devotion, an act of ordering his domain, of making it more prosperous in his name. And to prove their loyalty, they adopted Sobek as their personal and dynastic patron. They elevated him from a local swamp god to one of the premier gods of the Egyptian state. This is the moment Sobek hits the big time. The Pharaoh Amenemhat III, the greatest king of this dynasty, essentially moved his administrative capital to the Faiyum to oversee this project. He became the great champion of Sobek, and the things he built there are the stuff of legend. Near his pyramid at Hawara, he built his mortuary temple. This is the building that the Greek historian Herodotus, visiting 1,500 years later when it was already a ruin, would call the Labyrinth. Herodotus was a man who had seen the wonders of the world. He had seen the Acropolis in Athens. He had seen the great temples of Babylon. But this building broke him. He wrote in sheer awe that it had 3,000 rooms, half above ground, half below, in a bewildering, colossal complex of courtyards, colonnades, and passages, all roofed in solid stone. The pyramids, he wrote, are beyond description, but the labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids. And this legendary building, one of the lost wonders of the ancient world, was the heart of a complex dedicated to Amenemhat III and Sobek. It was the god's new glorious state-funded palace. In another temple in the Faiyum, Madi, built by the same king, we find the theological proof of this new partnership. On a carved stone relief, we see a crucial scene. The pharaoh, Amenemhat III, is shown standing between two gods who are anointing him, pouring the ankh, the sign of life, over his head. It is a baptism scene, a transference of divine power. One of these gods is Anubis, the ancient, orderly, predictable god of the afterlife and mummification. The other is Sobek. This is the new theology carved in stone. The pharaoh is not just the son of Ra, the sun god. He is not just the heir of Osiris. He is the man who has mastered the two fundamental forces of the universe. He is blessed by Anubis, the god of orderly death. And he is blessed by Sobek, the god of chaotic life. He has the backing of the established civilized gods, and he has the backing of the primal, untamed saurian predator. He is, in short, unassailable. This new alliance became so total, so absolute, that the royal family did the unthinkable. They began to name their children after him. This would be the equivalent of a modern royal family naming their heir Fenrir or Loki. It is a statement. We see a parade of the most powerful men in the kingdom, the pharaohs of the 13th dynasty which followed, taking the throne named Sobekotep, which means Sobek is satisfied. It is a declaration that their rule is sanctioned by this new, powerful, and terrifying god. The crocodile god is pleased with me is a hell of a thing to put on your royal banner. But the climax of this entire story, the ultimate proof of Sobek's journey from the swamp to the throne, comes at the very end of the 12th dynasty. Amenemhat III's long and glorious reign is followed by a brief one from his son, and then the male line fails. a woman takes the throne. She's the first, disputably but most confirmed, woman to rule Egypt not as a regent or a queen, but as a full king with a complete fivefold royal title. Her name is Sobek Neferu, the beauty of Sobek. Let's pause and truly absorb the power of that name. This is a woman in a world of absolute, unquestioned patriarchy, taking on the most powerful, most masculine role on earth. She needs a divine patron. She needs to project an aura of unassailable authority, of legitimacy, and of power. She does not choose Isis, the divine mother and queen. She does not choose Hathor, the goddess of love, beauty, and femininity. She does not choose Neith, the ancient warrior goddess. She chooses Sobek. She ties her name, her identity, and her reign to the most ancient, most ferocious, most virile, and most intimidatingly male god in the pantheon. She is claiming the power of the crocodile. She is the beauty of Sobek, a name that is itself a perfect paradox. It implies that she has the feminine grace of a queen, Neferu, but she is backed by and contains within her the primal, monstrous, and terrifying power of the Lord of the Faiyum. It is one of the most brilliant and audacious political and religious statements in ancient history. In a few short generations, Sobek had completed an astonishing journey. He had climbed from a local swamp god to the divine patron of the Pharaoh's house. He was a kingmaker, with his name Sobek Neferu on the throne of Egypt itself. But this very success created a new theological problem. How could this local god from the Faiyum now stand as an equal to the great ancient national gods like Ra, the Sun King, or Horus, the god of kingship itself? He couldn't just be allied with them. He had to become them. His biography was about to enter its most complex and powerful chapter, the chapter of syncretism. The Egyptians had a brilliant way of upgrading their gods. They didn't replace them, they merged them. Sobek, the rising star, was about to get the two biggest mergers in history. First, he was fused with Ra, becoming Sobek Ra. This sounds insane. Ra was the sun, the light, the sky, the symbol of order. Sobek was the deep water, the darkness, the symbol of chaos, fire and water. But to the Egyptians, it was perfect logic. Every night, the sun, Ra, had to die and sail through the underworld, a chaotic, watery abyss filled with demons. To survive and be reborn at dawn, Ra needed the baddest bodyguard in the water. That bodyguard was Sobek. Sobek Ra was the god of the complete cycle, the chaotic power of the abyss. Sobek was the very thing that protected the orderly return of the light, Ra. Second, he was fused with Horus, becoming Sobek Horus. This one was even simpler. Horus was the god of the pharaoh, the symbol of legitimate, just rule. Sobek was raw power, brute strength, the sharp-toothed predator. The ideal pharaoh needed to be both. He needed the divine right of Horus and the reptilian ferocity of Sobek. Sobek Horus was the iron fist of kingship. He was the ultimate symbol of royal power, a king who was both righteous and ruthless. Sobek the crocodile was now fully integrated. He was a creator god, Sobek Ra, and he was the patron god of the king, Sobek Horus. His evolution was complete, and this final balanced, dual-natured identity was given a final, magnificent monument. It was a temple so unique, so perfect in its design, that it stands today as the ultimate statement of the Egyptian worldview. Sobek's final and greatest monument was the Temple of Calm, Ombo. It is a double temple split perfectly down the middle. One side was for Horus, the god of the sky and order. The other side was for Sobek, the god of the water and chaos. This architecture was a sermon in stone. Its message was that the universe requires both. You cannot have order without chaos, light without dark, or civilization without the wild. This was the final acceptance. Sobek wasn't good or evil, he was necessary. The temple was also a place of practical magic. Inside Sobek's sanctuary, priests used a nilometer well to measure the flood, literally reading the god's mood from the water level. And in a final stunning twist, the temple walls are carved with a complete set of surgical tools. This was a hospital. Pilgrims came to be healed by the combined power of Horus, the god of magical restoration, and Sobek, the god of raw physical regeneration. This is the final mature version of Sobek. He is the cosmic creator. He is the king's divine protector, and he is the primal healer of the human body. And so, in the grand halls of Kamambo and the courts of the Pharaoh, Sobek's evolution was complete. He was a cosmic creator, a royal protector, a divine healer. But this was the high theology, the state-approved priestly version of the god. What about the fisherman on his reed skiff? What about the soldier clutching an amulet? What did they feel? To truly understand Sobek, we have to leave the grand temples and walk the muddy banks of the river to see how the common person lived, loved, and, most of all, feared their living God. For the high priests and the pharaoh, Sobek was a complex theological concept. Sobek Ra, the engine of the cosmos, Sobek Horus, the symbol of royal power. But for the fisherman on his papyrus skiff in the Faiyum, Sobek was the sudden ripple in the water that meant he should pull his nets in now. For the woman washing clothes on the riverbank, he was the log that wasn't a log. For the soldier marching into Nubia, he was the small stone amulet in his hand, a piece of reptilian rage he clutched for courage. The low theology, the faith of the common people, was not about abstract physics. It was about survival. It was about fertility. It was about fear. And in Sobek's heartland, the city of Shedet, or Crocodilopolis, this faith reached its ultimate, bizarre, and literal conclusion. The main temple of Sobek in Crocodilopolis was, for most of its history, the god's primary residence on earth. And the priests there did not just offer prayers to a cold stone statue. They maintained a living, breathing, sacred animal whom they believed to be the Ka, the living spirit, the physical incarnation of Sobek himself. His name was Petsuchos. This is a Greek rendering of the Egyptian Pai in Sobek, which means he who belongs to Sobek, or more simply, the son of Sobek. Petsuchos was not an animal. He was the god. When the Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt in the 5th century BC, he was a worldly, cynical, and well-traveled man. He had seen strange cults all over the known world, but what he saw in the Faiyum astonished him. He wrote, "In some parts of Egypt, the crocodile is sacred. Those who live near Thebes and Lake Maurice, the Faiyum, hold them in particular veneration. They select one crocodile to be raised, tame it, and call it Petsuchos. They adorn it with ornaments of gold and glass, putting rings in its ears and bracelets on its forepaws." A few centuries later, another visitor, the geographer Strabo, added to this picture. He described his own visit to the Labyrinth and the Temple of Sobek, and what he saw there became one of the most famous and strangest passages in classical travel writing. He describes how he, along with a Roman official, went to see the sacred animal. The priests, knowing they had important guests, led them to the edge of the temple lake where Petsuchos was lying. Let's try to paint this scene. This is not a zoo. There is no reinforced glass. There is no do not cross barrier. This is a place of worship. The air is thick with the smoke of incense and the smell of the swamp, damp earth, rotting vegetation, and the musky reptilian odor of the god himself. The priests are chanting, and they are carrying lunch. Strabo writes that the priests approached the beast. One of them, with great reverence, prized open the crocodile's immense jaws. The other priest, Strabo says, thrust in the cake and then the meat, and after that the honey and milk. This was the god's offering. A hand-fed meal delivered directly into the bone-crushing jaws by a priest whose entire life was a performance of this single, terrifying act of faith. Imagine the psychology of this, the tension, the absolute intimate trust required of that priest, and the absolute awe it would inspire in the pilgrims. This was not a symbolic act. This was a man feeding a god who could kill him in half a second. This was faith made visceral. Petsuchos, adorned with gold, pampered by his attendants, was the ultimate embodiment of the love and fear paradox. He was loved. He was the city's divine protector, its patron. His presence guaranteed the fertility of the Faiyum. He was the son of Sobek, a beautiful jeweled sacred being. He was feared. He was a colossal predator. The very act of worshiping him was an act of bravery. To stand in his presence was to stand on the knife edge between the human world and the raw, chaotic power of nature. The line between devotion and terror was not just thin, it was non-existent. He was also an oracle. Pilgrims would travel from all over Egypt to ask questions of the god. They would bring their offerings, and the priests would interpret Petsuchos' movements. My wife is barren. Will Sobek grant us a child? My business is failing. Should I venture south to trade? The priest would approach the god. If he opened his mouth to accept the food offering, it was a yes, a sign of divine favor. If he turned his head away, it was a no, a terrible omen. Think of the power held by those priests and the absolute life-changing authority held by that single lazy reptilian gesture. An entire family's future could be decided by the whim of a well-fed crocodile. And when Petsuchos, a mortal animal after all, died of old age or sickness, he was not just disposed of. He was given a full divine funeral. He was treated like a dead pharaoh. The city would go into deep mourning. The god's body would be taken by the priests to the Wabet, the pure place, the sacred house of mummification. There, he would be ritually wept over, washed and packed in natron salts for 40 days to draw out all moisture. His body would then be anointed with precious oils and resins, his internal organs removed and placed in their own canopic jars. His entire massive body would be painstakingly wrapped in hundreds of yards of the finest linen, with sacred amulets and jewelry tucked into the folds. Finally, this colossal mummified god would be placed in a massive, elaborate sarcophagus and laid to rest with all honors in a special necropolis, a cemetery reserved for the gods. This was not a rare event. Archaeologists working at Kamombo and in the Faiyum have uncovered vast cemeteries dedicated to nothing but mummified crocodiles. They have found the great patriarchs, the old Petsuchoi, 18-foot monsters buried in grand tombs, but they have also found thousands of others, mummified crocodiles of all sizes. They have found mummified hatchlings. They have found mummified crocodile eggs. What does this mean? These smaller mummies weren't gods, they were offerings. This is a form of piety that is almost heartbreaking in its sincerity. A poor farmer or a desperate woman comes to the temple. They cannot afford a great bull for sacrifice, so they buy a mummified hatchling or even a single mummified egg, and they offer it to the great god. It is an offering of potential life. It is a prayer for fertility given in the form of the god's own most vulnerable young. Here, great Sobek, the offering seems to say, is a new life for you. Please grant a new life to my fields or to my family. This is the intimate, personal, and deeply emotional side of the crocodile cult. This personal relationship is also burned into the words the Egyptians left behind. In hymns carved on temple walls and in tiny personal amulets, we can hear the voices of the people who worshipped him, and they are always speaking to two different gods. First, there was Sobek, the provider. He was, above all, a god of fertility. The crocodile, emerging from the wet black mud of the Nile, was the ultimate symbol of life emerging from the earth. He was he who makes the herbage green. A hymn from Calm Ambo, a great state prayer, praises him. Hail to you, the flood itself, who makes green the two banks, who fills the storehouses, who makes the granaries swell, who gives wealth to the poor. But this was also a personal biological fertility. The crocodile, a creature of immense stamina and potency, was a god of virility. The people prayed to him for children. One of his most common and startling epithets, one found in the Faiyum, is Sobek, the Lord of the Semian. This is not a polite, abstract title. It is earthy, blunt, and powerful. It is a biological reality elevated to a divine status. He is the god of the raw, creative, sexual urge. When a man prayed for a son, or a woman prayed to conceive, they were praying to the virility of the crocodile. Second, there was Sobek, the protector. This was the soldier's god. His ferocity was not just a threat to be feared, it was a weapon to be borrowed. An Egyptian soldier, marching into a terrifying battle in Syria or Nubia, far from the safety of the Black Land, would carry a small stone amulet of a crocodile. He would pray to the Raging One, the Lord of Strife. He would ask the god to imbue him with that same saurian ferocity to make him a sharp-toothed warrior who would devour his enemies. Sobek was a divine bodyguard. His epithets, watchful of face and raised of brow, paint the picture of a sentinel, eternally vigilant. He was the ultimate guardian, watchful and utterly ruthless in defense of those under his care, especially the Pharaoh, his divine representative. But then there was the other side, the one the mother on the riverbank knew all too well. This was Sobek the destroyer. The Egyptians were above all realists. They were not sentimental. They did not try to hide the dark side of their god or pretend it wasn't there. In the very same temples where they praised him as the provider, they carved epithets that send a shiver down the spine. They called him the one with the Scythian rage. They called him he who loves robbery. They called him the one who seizes with his might, and most chillingly, the one whose attack cannot be repelled. They embraced it. They worshipped his benevolence and his violence. They understood that the forces of creation and destruction are not opposites. They are the same force. The creative power of the Nile is, by its very nature, a violent, destructive, and untamable power. To love one, you must respect and fear the other. This embrace of a two-sided God, this worship of both the provider and the destroyer, is the key to the entire cult. But it also forced the Egyptian priests to confront a massive, almost tragic, theological problem. If their God was a protector, how could he also be a mindless devourer? If he was an ally of the Pharaoh, Horus, how could he also be linked to the Pharaoh's greatest enemy, Set? To find the answer, we must journey into the very heart of the sacred contradiction, a paradox that defines not only Sobek's life, but his final terrifying role in the afterlife as well. This brings us to the most complex, controversial, and human part of Sobek's story, his relationship with the other gods. The Egyptian pantheon was not a happy, harmonious family. It was a network of shifting alliances and violent rivalries. And Sobek was right in the middle of its greatest. Central conflict, his most difficult relationship, was with the god who defined chaos, Set. Set was the god of the Red Land, the desert. He was the god of storms, of violence, and of foreigners. He was the force of disruption, the necessary evil that defined order by opposing it. And most famously, he was the jealous murderer of his own brother, the good king Osiris. Given Sobek's own violent, primal, raging nature, it was perhaps inevitable that the two would be linked. In some traditions, Sobek is even named as the son of Set. This is a dark, shocking lineage. It connects Sobek, the god of the life-giving black land, to Set, the god of the sterile red land. It connects the protector of the pharaoh to the divine enemy of the pharaoh. This created a profound theological problem. How could this be? This conflict plays out dramatically in the central myth of Egyptian religion, the murder of Osiris and the subsequent war between his killer Set and his son, the avenger Horus. In this epic saga, Sobek plays a curious and deeply ambiguous role. In some versions of the myth, Sobek is an outright villain, an ally of Set. After Set murders Osiris and dismembers his body, he scatters the pieces across Egypt. In one particularly dark story, a crocodile, identified with Sobek, eats the final most important piece, the phallus of the dead king. This is a devastating symbolic act. The god of fertility devours the symbol of fertility of the god king. It is an act of ultimate destruction and chaos, forever preventing Osiris from being made whole, and forcing Isis to use magic to conceive their son, Horus. In other stories, when Isis is hiding her infant son Horus from Set in the marshes, she has to magically protect him from the crocodiles, who are seen as agents of the god of chaos. In these stories, Sobek is the enemy. He is the mindless devourer, the agent of Isfet, chaos. But then, in other texts, the story is completely, wildly different. In a version from the ancient pyramid texts, after Set and Horus have their climactic magical battle, Horus's hands are cut off and thrown into the Nile. It is Isis, his mother, who calls out in despair. And who answers? It is Sobek. He commands his subjects, the fish, to find the hands, and he fishes them out of the water, restoring them to Horus. In this version, Sobek is a savior. He is the one who steps in, retrieves what was lost, and makes the rightful king, Horus, whole again. In yet another story, it is Sobek, who in his crocodile form helps Isis and her sister Nephthys find the scattered pieces of Osiris's body, using his back to carry the goddesses across the water as they search. So, which is it? Is he the ally of Set or the savior of Horus? Is he the devourer of Osiris or his helper? The answer, frustratingly and beautifully, is both. The ancient Egyptians, with their sophisticated paradoxical worldview, were not troubled by this contradiction. They understood that Sobek was not an ally of anyone. He was the embodiment of the river, a force of nature, and nature is impartial. Sometimes the river, Sobek, does hide the agents of chaos, Set. Sometimes the river does destroy life, eating Osiris. But at other times the river reveals what was lost, finding Horus's hands. It gives back, it restores. Sobek is not loyal to Horus or to Set. He is loyal to the river. He is a third independent power in the universe. He is the wild card. He is the force that can, at any moment, intervene to destroy or to save. This is what makes him so much more than just a crocodile god. He is the Egyptian answer to the problem of chance, the problem of nature's terrifying indifference. He is the god of the gray area, the god who proves that life is not a simple battle between good and evil, but a constant, messy, and unpredictable negotiation between order, Horus, and chaos, Set, with the primal power of nature, Sobek, holding the balance. And this ultimate paradox, this duality of destroyer and savior, follows the Egyptian soul even beyond death into its final, terrible judgment. When an Egyptian died, their soul, or Ba, had to embark on a perilous journey through the underworld, the Duat. This journey culminated in a final trial, the weighing of the heart in the Hall of Two Truths. Here, the soul would stand before 42 divine judges and declare their innocence. Their heart, the seat of their memory, their conscience, their soul, would be placed on one side of a great golden scale. On the other side was the pure white feather of Mayat, the goddess of truth, order, and justice. If the soul had lived a good, balanced life, the heart and the feather would be equal. The god Thoth would record the just verdict, and the soul would be granted eternal life in the paradise of the field of reeds. But if the heart was heavy, if it was weighed down with sin, with lies, with murder, with Isfet, chaos, the scale would tip. And waiting by the scales, crouched and hungry, was a monster. She was Ammit, the devourer of the dead. And what did Ammit look like? She was a demonic hybrid, a combination of the three most dangerous animals in the Egyptian world. She had the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This is the ultimate terrifying face of the crocodile. In the most important moment of a person's eternal existence, the crocodile is the symbol of damnation. She is the face of oblivion. If your heart fails the test, it is thrown to her and she devours it. And your soul, your very identity, is destroyed forever. It is the second death from which there is no return. The crocodile is the end. And yet, this is not the end of Sobek's story. In the very same text, like the Book of the Dead, Sobek also appears as a protector. In spells designed to help the deceased, the soul prays to Sobek to help them navigate the dangerous, winding waterways of the underworld. He is, after all, the master of the water. In one fascinating passage from the pyramid texts, Sobek is called upon to restore the Pharaoh's senses, which were lost in death. He is a god who can repair what has been broken, who can make the dead see and hear again. This is the final, ultimate paradox. The crocodile, Ammit, is the symbol of the soul's destruction. But the crocodile god, Sobek, is a force for its restoration. He is both the threat and the savior, present at the beginning of the world and at the final judgment of the soul. The worship of Sobek, this ancient, primal, and complex faith, survived for over 3,500 years. It outlasted the pharaohs who built the pyramids. It outlasted the New Kingdom emperors. It was only with the final total victory of Christianity and later Islam in Egypt that the temples finally fell silent. The rise of monotheistic faiths with their clear-cut binary morality, a single all-good God and a separate all-evil devil, had no room for a god like Sobek. He was a creature of the gray area, a god who was both good and evil. He was demoted from a god to a demon. The sacred crocodiles of Kalmombo and the Faiyum were no longer fed. They were hunted as symbols of pagan darkness. The Lord of the Waters receded back into the mud. But did he ever truly leave? His impact on Egypt was profound and permanent. Politically, his cult gave an entire dynasty its divine mandate, creating a new, more ferocious model of kingship. His theological legacy is even more significant. Sobek is perhaps the clearest, most honest, and most realistic God ever conceived. We, in a world shaped by later traditions, are often trained to think of God as a being of perfect, uncomplicated goodness. This forces us to invent a separate entity, a devil, a Satan, a force of darkness, to account for the suffering, the chaos, and the simple, brutal unfairness of the world. We need a reason, why a child gets sick, why a famine strikes. We need someone to blame. The Egyptians were perhaps more mature. Their system did not require this split. In Sobek, they created a god who was the package deal. He was the life-giving father and the child-eating monster. He was the protector of the king and the ally of the usurper. He was the face of damnation and the restorer of the soul. They did not see this as a contradiction. They saw it as the truth. They understood that the universe is not your friend. The same sun that ripens the corn can also scorch the desert. The same water that feeds the crops can also drown the village. The same creative biological urge that brings a child into the world is the same red in tooth and claw natural law that allows a predator to survive. This is the emotional and moral message of Sobek. He is not a god for the faint of heart. He does not offer easy answers or a promise of perfect, painless safety. He does not promise that the river will always be kind. He offers the power to face a world that is both beautiful and terrifying, and to not blink. He is the God who tells you that you cannot control the river. You will never tame it. You will never make it perfectly safe. All you can do is respect its power, learn its rhythms, and have the courage to build your life on its banks, knowing full well that the God who provides your harvest is watching you from the reeds.